For more on the dispute and what the government is ready to do about it, I'm going to talk to Federal Labor Minister Steve MacKinnon. Minister MacKinnon, thanks so much for joining us and welcome back to Power Play. How are you doing?
Thank you, Mike.
I wanted to know if you could give us the latest right now in terms of the negotiation with Canada Post and the union. What are you hearing from the bargaining table?
Well, these are extremely challenging negotiations, Mike. Obviously, there are a number of issues outstanding and considerable space remains between the parties to negotiate. As Minister of Labour, my job is to provide all the resources that I can to the parties so that they can successfully conclude a new collective agreement, and that's exactly what we're doing.
You have indicated your reticence to intervene. Why is that? This is something that so many Canadians depend on. Why are you standing on the sidelines right now waiting?
Indeed, my job in some ways is to represent Canadians at the table, and you can be sure that I'll be listening very closely to small businesses, retailers, of course, employees of the corporation and their families, and Canadians generally. And that's a perspective we always want to make sure is represented at the negotiating table. I'll continue to meet with the parties if that can be helpful. I don't think it's a secret that Canada Post has seen significant transformation in its business conditions. Those challenging agenda items are on the table, as well as the union's aspirations for dealing with those challenging business conditions. So I know that the parties have a lot of work to do. We want to make sure they keep their nose to the grindstone and working out a deal, and we're looking forward to supporting them in that.
But the Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses, which obviously represents a number of those businesses, which your government has said are the economic engine of this country, 79% of small businesses in Canada rely on Canada Post for their business. Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses is calling on you to intervene now. So at what point does it have to get to for your government to say enough is enough?
Well, I would never rule anything out, Mike. I would simply say this, that our sole focus, our sole priority today and for the foreseeable future is to assist these parties at the bargaining table to try and get a collective agreement.
Last time that this happened in 2018, your government legislated them back to work, forced them back to work. That was after about 5 weeks. Does it have to get to 5 weeks for you to step in?
Look, Mike, I'm not going to speculate about what may happen when. What I do want to reiterate is how seriously we take this round of bargaining. Every circumstance is different with different conditions that are present. We, of course, always evaluate what is going on outside the negotiating table that may weigh on the negotiations. But for now, negotiations are the path that we want these parties to follow.
Now, you had spoken earlier about what is happening with Canada Post and, in a sense, how we got here. Now, Canada Post has asked your government to change its mandate to better make it more competitive and really shift in terms of what it does. Do you think that if your government had allowed it to make that shift, that we would be at this point right now?
Well, I'm the Minister of Labour, and my job is to be a go-between in some ways between the parties. I'm not the minister responsible for Canada Post or Canada Post management. I cannot really speak to the policy decisions that must be made on that. In fact, there's a sort of wall between me and the unique role that I play and those other decisions, Mike. But what I will say, and and reiterate, is there's an extremely challenging business context out there for Canada Post, and I think Canadians are well aware that they face significant competitive challenges. At the same time, employees and their families at Canada Post have aspirations too, and those aspirations deserve to be aired at the bargaining table.
I take your point, but it is still you are still a minister of this government, and I guess what I'm asking is whether or not you think that after this should serve as an inflection point to really take a hard look at Canada Post and what we want it to be going forward.
I think that's a fair question. I think, and that's a fair debate that Canadians and the government may wish to entertain. For right now, Mike, my job is to help these parties get a collective agreement and find a path forward for a successful Canada Post and obviously a safe workplace with employees who are happy with their collective agreement inside that corporation.
I just want to talk about intervention in other strikes. Now, you did intervene in a rail strike and a port strike. There's a court challenge now with the former. Are you confident that this method of forcing binding arbitration will hold up in court?
Extremely so. We faced a decision that we did not take lightly. No Minister of Labour ever takes intervention in these issues lightly. But in both cases, Mike, I wish to remind you that we were facing significant health and economic and other challenges to the Canadian economy. When we risk running out of chlorine for our water supplies, when union workers in mines and auto plants and manufacturing businesses across the country are at risk, when our food supply and the exports that the world relies on for things like potash, obviously wheat and grains, when all of those things are put at risk, no responsible Minister of Labour could decline the opportunity to protect Canadians, protect our economy, and yes, protect hundreds of thousands of union and other jobs.
I wanted to ask you, what do you say to those workers who voted for you in any of the previous elections, but especially when you guys came to power in 2015, saying that you would be a party that protects collective bargaining rights? It would seem that after legislating a number of different strikes, people back to work, that's not what you're showing. So what do you say to those people who say that you are not in favor of workers' rights?
I would say, look at our record. We've passed something that the union movement in this country has sought for decades, which is a ban on replacement workers, which will be in effect very soon. We assured 10 sick days in the Canada Labour Code. Canada Labour Code is one of the most progressive, important pieces of labour legislation in the Western world, and we have worked within that. These are tools that Parliament gives unions, employers, and of course, the Minister of Labour to manage what is one of the most advanced economies and advanced systems of labour relations in the world. And so, of course, we take things on a case-by-case basis. I will say this, and I said this on Tuesday, Mike, when I announced the decision in the port matter, that sometimes these disputes take too long to negotiate. The issues at hand are not commensurate with the amount of time required to negotiate them. These things stretch out over years. They create anxiety for union workers and their families and employers, to say nothing of the people who depend on these services for their own success. So my predecessor, Mr. O'Regan, named a commission of inquiry in the West Coast ports. We're very hopeful that report, which I expect to get early next year, will point out some ideas and observations that we can apply not just in the West Coast ports, but across these disputes, to see if we cannot get to fair agreements, negotiated agreements, but do so without the anxiety that I find at times a little needless in terms of what it creates in terms of uncertainty for Canadians.
So I just want to get this right. So you are for workers' rights as long as it's in a timely fashion and that negotiations doesn't take long? Because that's what it sounds like you're saying.
Oh, no. Well, I would just say Canadians are reasonable people. Unions are reasonable. Employers are reasonable. We all want, in the end, a prosperous economy with well-compensated and safe workers. What I am saying is these processes have become heavy. They take a long time. They require enormous resources from all concerned. And I think there's a better way to alleviate the anxieties of workers and employers, and of course the people who rely on these companies or these services, so that we can get to fair agreements in a more expedited way, in a serious way, achieve objectives that may exist at the time for the parties involved, and continue to build this great economy and this great system of industrial relations that we have in this country.
Just before I let you go, in fairness, workers would not see it the way that you just laid out. They would say that they're being strong-armed back to work.
I don't know how that follows from what I just answered, Mike, but what I would say is that we take each of these.
Well, Minister, if they're being forced back to work with legislation, is that not how they would feel?
Well, we haven't forced anyone back to work with legislation in the recent past. We of course did.
Pardon me, or with a ministerial order. I mean, either way, they're being pushed back to work and not negotiating at the table.
As I mentioned, we take these things on a case-by-case basis, but we had two unprecedented events occur in this past year. In one case, both of our mainline railways. In the other case, the most important ports on both of our coasts that put at risk hundreds of thousands of union jobs and other jobs, farmers, families, livelihoods, and so no responsible government after such a prolonged period of negotiation can ignore the risks to our economy, to health, to safety for Canadians. And so we made what was the appropriate judgment at the time, and I stand by that.
Minister of Labour, Steve MacKinnon, that's all the time we have. Thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike.